Welcome back to the London Futurists podcast. Almost every serious discussion about options to constrain the development of advanced AI results in someone raising the question, but what about China? The worry behind this question is that slowing down AI research and development in the US and Europe will allow China to race ahead. It's true, the relationship between China and the rest of the world has many complications. That's why we're delighted that our guest in this episode is Kayla Blomquist, the co-founder and director of the Oxford China Policy Lab, or OCPL for short. OCPL describes itself as a global community of China and emerging technology researchers at Oxford who produce policy-relevant research to navigate risks in the US-China relationship and beyond. In parallel with her role at OCPL, Kayla is pursuing a DPhil at the Oxford Internet Institute. She is a recent fellow at the Centre for Governance of AI and the lead researcher and contributing author to the Oxford China Briefing book. She holds an MSc from the Oxford Internet Institute and a BA with honours in International Relations, Public Policy and Mandarin Chinese from the University of Denver. She also studied at Peking University and is professionally fluent in Mandarin. Kayla previously worked as a diplomat in the US mission to China, where she specialized in the governance of emerging technologies, human rights, and improving the use of new technology within government services. Kayla, welcome to the London Futurists podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us, Kayla.
Kayla, could you tell us a bit about your background, what led you to become a diplomat, and what subsequently led you to stop being a diplomat?
Absolutely. So as mentioned, before coming to Oxford, I worked as a US diplomat in China for a number of years. Before that, I decided I wanted to be a diplomat when I was very young, roughly the age of 12. What happened was I was a figure skater in a very small town in Wisconsin. I knew I wanted to represent my country internationally. I really believed in the Olympic dream, Olympic spirit, bridging countries through sport and other means. And when I realized I wasn't quite on the Olympic track for skating, I looked for another outlet for those ambitions. And around that time, had the chance to start learning Chinese. So I just made up my mind and went straight for it. Did a number of internships with the State Department throughout college, kept studying Chinese, really tried to round out my studies with public policy, international relations, diplomacy studies, and the language, which really set me up to go straight into it after graduating. That journey, in part, it was a question of getting to know myself and what my personal fit was throughout my career. The US Foreign Service and many other foreign services, diplomatic corps operate in a similar way, is based on this concept of a generalist foreign service officer. You are expected to be worldwide available, go to many different countries, but also work in many different jobs. And there are fantastic reasons for this, and there are so many people that works really well for throughout their careers. But I just knew that I personally wanted to specialize in a region, country, as well as policy area, and had this evolving sense that I wanted that to be technology, being really interested in the impacts of technology development on society, and very interested in how governments try to intervene and regulate that technology, but also how governments use technology to govern society. And living in and studying China was such a fascinating avenue for that. So sensing the AI wave coming, I decided to leave and return to my studies, and am now pursuing my DPhil here at the OII, Oxford Internet Institute. Overall, though, I wanted to also contribute to be a solution to a problem that I saw, which was there's so much detailed expertise needed in these very complicated issues with such gravity. So in my case, seeing that it's really difficult to find people who know China well, who speak Chinese really well, and staff such an important bilateral relationship of the US and China. But also, if you add emerging technologies, especially AI, into the picture, There are many skill sets that need to be cultivated within that. And I, at the time, just didn't see that happening around me. And I wanted to try to help bridge the expertise gap by cultivating it myself. And that's taken me on quite the journey since, which we'll get into, I'm sure.
So in the Western world, there's a great variety of views about AI safety and governance, with accelerationists, doomers, safety activists, and lots more in between. Is there a similar variety of views in China, or is it more monolithic?
Yeah, great question. So I'd say, like the US, like many other countries, perhaps even more so in sheer size, China is a very big country. It goes without saying. There's so many people with their own interests and goals. I think that in a way goes without saying, but also is so often missed when people are talking about US-China AI competition. So from that starting point, there are many humans, there are many businesses, there are many different parts of the government itself with their own priorities. So there are naturally competing views as well as just different conceptions of what AI itself is and could be and what it could mean for society. I think differently from the West, there's less of a labeled divide between accelerationists, doomers, safety ethics. There aren't so much forced into these groupings as we see a lot in the discourse for those same groups over in the West. On top of that, there is also a really huge focus on practical deployment of existing and forthcoming AI systems. There's a really huge focus on diffusion of various forms of AI throughout industry, throughout society. There are discussions of AGI and ASI for sure, especially in specific labs and research communities. But holistically, I wouldn't say there's the same centralization of views around what we're aiming for is AGI or ASI. And then there are implications from that. Working backwards, it's not so much the sense of, okay, these are the major catastrophic risks that flow from that starting point, or these are the opportunities. But I would say there is a growing awareness of the security and safety implications of advanced AI, especially throughout the research community on the technical and the policy side.
The common story is that China was woken up with a bit of a rude shock when Western software from DeepMind in London beat their champion Go player after having publicly defeated the Korean champion the previous year. This caused Xi Jinping and his advisors to say, well, we can't have the world dominated by this Western software. We have to set a policy that we are going to win the AI race. Is that a fair framing?
I think a lot of it absolutely is. That instance was one of a series where there's this symbolic event that really captures the public's attention across countries, basically crystallizing, oh, this is going to be a strategic technology, and it is now reaching a threshold where you can visibly see its implications or start to. So that was a very significant event. And yes, we can see policy efforts throughout the Chinese government, especially from very high levels, starting to set in motion industrial policies and other policies to lay the groundwork to make China a leader in AI, especially for economic reasons, for military reasons, and more. However, there is less rhetorical framing, both in government and broader discourse around the AI race itself. This really goes back to a lot of modern Chinese history around feeling that it needed to leapfrog in technologies, having been behind on certain technologies, especially telecommunications, the internet at first, really hurt some of the government's strategic ambitions, especially being reliant on foreign technologies. We've seen previous instances of this, and quite successful ones at that, with attempts at being a leader in 5G telecommunications, especially with Huawei. Really taking those lessons as hard-earned lessons that, okay, we want to be on the forefront of this. That point also connects to a lot of central strategic thinking around the importance of open source AI models, infrastructures, underlying digital infrastructures, and the diffusion of Chinese or other models throughout the world as setting the baseline for not just global usage and market dominance, but also setting standards worldwide and the strategic value that comes from that for whichever country and ecosystem establishes it.
To the extent that there is an AI race, Jensen Huang of NVIDIA recently said he thinks China's going to win it because its models are not far behind the cutting edge. It's got more engineers. Crucially, it can build infrastructure much more quickly and cheaply. Do you think that's a reasonable assessment?
We'll be right back after a quick break.
Imagine being in the boardroom with the world's most influential C-suite executives, exploring big questions about the economy, AI, and hybrid work. Welcome to C-Suite Perspectives, hosted by Steve Odland, President and CEO of the Conference Board, the ultimate podcast for professionals seeking the truth beyond trending headlines. Cut through the noise and dive into data-driven discussions, unbiased, nonpartisan, and straight from the top. Listen to C-Suite Perspectives and harness the power of trusted insights for what's ahead.
Yeah, I think those factors are really worth raising. There's definitely a very deep talent bench in the country and of Chinese engineers all over the world, and definitely true on the infrastructure front. I would even add in a few other factors, though, to consider. All of these are metrics to show that China will have an advantage in these ways of propelling AI progress forward. One of them being a really vibrant developer community, building on the talent front, but a lot of the incentives around even people trying to build a career in AI development itself, just starting out to get a job in an incredibly competitive environment. A lot of the time, they'll need to contribute to open source projects. And as a result, and many other factors as well, there's a really vibrant open source ecosystem, in part cultivated by the state, as well as some of the major companies like Alibaba. I would say that's another thing to really pay attention to. In a different vein, I would say the funding environment is another factor we should bring out to talk about a bit. This one's a little bit more messy in that the funding environment is not what it is in the US. That means that there is a lot less capital just flowing around, especially via venture capital. Now, there is a lot of government-led investment, but it's just not the scale that you'll see in Silicon Valley ecosystem. Kind of a dark horse factor within that is that dynamic means that an AI bubble, that is all the talk these days, is perhaps slightly less likely within the Chinese funding ecosystem for AI itself. That is a little bit of an unpredictable factor, but one worth bringing into the fold itself. One last thing on this comment of Jensen Huang, especially in light of the export control debate in the US, whether to sell H100 chips to China and everything unfolding in these weeks exactly with all of that. I want to take this chance to point out that the AI race is very often invoked, especially by heads of major tech companies in the US, but they're not alone. And I really encourage listeners, critical readers, to try to push those using it and invoking it to unpack, okay, why are you actually doing this? And I think in this instance with Jensen Huang and all of the developments around trying to get permission to sell H100s to China amidst a lot of dissent from throughout the US national security community, there's just a lot of leveraging of that phrase, AI race, simply to get businesses to get their interests to move forward. That takes so many different forms from across companies. I just really encourage people to look at that, scrutinize it, and say, what is this actor trying to accomplish by invoking this phrase? Because while the rest of the comment is valid, there's a lot of politicking underneath it.
Sure. And Wang has discovered now, I don't think it was new to him, that all you need to do is pay Trump a whack of the revenue. You raise it from 15% to 25%, and hey, presto, you're allowed to sell the chips again.
Yeah, and I think this is one of many instances that, put in aggregate, there's really a lack of coherence and consistency in not just US export control policy implementation these days, but the broader US approach of, okay, the US says it wants to win the AI race, but what does it mean by that? And you have all of these actors running around invoking it for their individual business interests often. So I think the public just needs to have a lot more scrutiny over how it's being used and where that's going to take us.
So there's a model that says that there's a lot of bad politicians doing bad things for political reasons, But beneath them, there's a lot of more sensible policy advocates and researchers who understand the importance that we don't rush headlong into an AI arms race. And that in due course, the politicians are going to ask their advisors, the policy people, we seem to be in a bit of a pickle here. What can you recommend? And you will then have something ready to share with them. Do you have an optimistic view about your colleagues that you meet in the AI safety policy community?
I definitely have so many colleagues throughout the broader AI policy governance communities that are doing both broadly scoped work and also very specific aspects of AI safety and security. Sometimes very well meaning and very effective versions of, okay, well, actually, because the US wants to quote unquote win the AI race, it needs to do X. And I think that there's some really valid ways to take that, and some throughout the community are. My optimistic view for a future that we would all be a part of would be, okay, let's use this as an opportunity to get really clear about, well, if you're running a race, it's going to take you somewhere as a society. Let's just get really clear on what race do we actually want to be running? Is it our own race, or is it responsive to what the defined competitor is doing? And therefore, maybe it's becoming reactive to just seeing, oh, well, China's DeepSeek open sourced its models, therefore there's going to be an onslaught of that in the US. There are many other ways that that plays out. But in order to further an optimistic view for the future in this realm, I think that there needs to be, in every country, but especially the US right now, a lot of discussion of what kind of society do we domestically want to have with advanced AI developed and then integrated. There's so many open questions with that, but with just invoking that top line AI race narrative and not thinking through those things, we're putting ourselves in a dangerous position. And I think now is the time to be having those quite comprehensive discussions.
Tell us more about the Oxford China Policy Lab. What specifically did you want to achieve when that was set up, and how's it going?
I started this with my co-founder, Scott Singer. In my first year here after moving to Oxford, there were several grounding concepts that led the establishment of OCPL. As I had mentioned previously, of my motives for going back into research and leading diplomacy as it's currently practiced is, we as in society, but also governments especially, are dealing with very complex, highly consequential questions in geopolitics and technology development and governance and competition. To handle those well, it goes without saying that you need a lot of expertise to know the details of how the technology works, what are its societal implications, and also in the context of the US-China relationship, how does China think about this? And China not being a monolith, how does the Chinese government think about this? What are the many aspects of the Chinese AI development ecosystem? And it goes on. And there's so many things that need to be quickly understood. And governments and people who work within them are often incredibly hardworking, incredibly knowledgeable, but may not have the time to do the deep dives needed to cultivate that real-time expertise. And really saw an opportunity in academia, especially the Oxford ecosystem, which has a lot of thinking about AI governance, especially to bridge the policy academic divide to try and bring some of the expertise to current policy questions in a timely but very rigorous manner. And then in the inverse of how do we make sure all of this talent going into very in-depth research is actually not just sticking within the ivory tower and going to good use. And then the second grounding concept is, so US-China competition, especially in AI and technology, impacts everyone. And everyone, we think, is stuck in the middle in some way. Whether that is you're in a country that is not the US or China, but now you're dealing with questions of your entire AI stack is dependent on one or the other, for the most part, heavily dependent. Or you are someone who grew up in China and studied in the US and is now trying to navigate a career that doesn't cleanly fit into one or the other, all the way to the more catastrophic risk questions of, well, if US-China tensions escalate further into potentially a conflict scenario and a large scale one at that, there's no one on earth that won't be touched by that. In the AI realm, that applies as well, where we are in this broadly defined and often underdefined race dynamic, but it is fueling rapid development of many forms of advanced AI. That too touches everyone in the world. And so we wanted to really highlight the human dimension and bring the human dimension to the study of tech and geopolitics, do it in a rigorous way, and try and feed that in a timely manner into places where impact is possible.
And how's it going? Can you measure success? Are there disappointments that led you to think, oh, this is going to be more difficult than you'd hoped?
The wins, we're really, really proud of our fellowship program. So we're going into our 4th year now and have some really outstanding applicants that we're really excited to work with. Past fellowship cohorts, we've taken very heavily current Oxford graduate students. We have taken some practitioners as well. And we've had many of them switch from maybe they were purely focused on an area of studies, PhD, and not really thinking about AI and its impacts before at all. But a lot of them have switched research directions. A lot of them have pivoted into AI governance as a field. And also the community that has resulted of exploring many different ideas that we have, bringing together the disparate skill sets. Not everyone is going to be a native Mandarin speaker. Not everyone is going to know how to train a very advanced AI model. Not everyone is going to know how countries throughout Southeast Asia navigate their own position between the US and China. But actually, we can pull together a cohort where you have all of those skill sets and more. So that is ongoing, and we're very proud of it. Also, based in the UK, we have been working on a lot of advising throughout the space of the UK navigating its relationships with the US and China, especially in a time where there previously was not a lot of thinking around security implications of, say, adopting Chinese tech infrastructure throughout more sensitive spaces in the economy or government services, but also what role can the UK play in trying to help shape the US-China, especially AI relationship for the better, and trying to help create a vision for what that might look like, starting with the UK, but looking to expand to other countries, and have seen a lot of traction in that sense.
So there's evidence that these big beasts are going to pay attention to small little Britain without any big tech companies of its own?
Yeah, I absolutely believe so. Attention, I think there are very targeted and niche ways to go about this. UK in particular, not overselling convening power as the thing that's going to solve everything, but there are very specific ways that this plays a role. Even just looking at the Bletchley Summit, the first AI summit that ever existed, the UK started that, and it ensured that both the US and China were at the table to talk in that forum about major safety risks from advanced AI. That set in motion the AI Summit series, which of course has taken turns along the way, but it actually set up certain forms of path dependencies, the AI safety institutes as well that have now proliferated around the world. It has quite strong footing for norm creation and for bringing the major players together in, relatively speaking, productive ways.
There was a meeting of something called the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum in October, and Xi Jinping said that he was going to create, or China was going to create, a body called the World Artificial Intelligence Cooperation Organization, WACO, which would bring nations together as a step towards creating a global governance system for AI. Do you think that was real? Do you think that was genuine? Do you think it will happen?
It is in motion. There was a big announcement around that at the World AI Conference in Shanghai this summer, along with a number of other major initiatives, including China's Global AI Governance Action Plan, which was released within days of the US AI Action Plan. So the WAICO, WACO for short, there is movement in this direction, in that the big top-down announcement has been made that China is going to fund this and try to set it in motion. It's still early stages. I believe they have been hiring for it. I believe there have been early on meetings. So it is going somewhere. However, where exactly is not extremely clear, both in that it's early days, it's a big initiative, but also sometimes the way that these things play out is that it's more symbolic in nature rather than actually having really concrete initiatives that make a big difference. And I think that is something to watch for. Will this go more in the symbolic direction, or will it actually have concrete outcomes, and what will they be? Just one other note on that. Well, especially with the US's anti-multilateralism stances and non-participation or rejection in many ways of norms around the UN, but also there's been a long-standing numbers advantage for China in the UN context. And so we also see a lot of encouragement by the Chinese state to channel AI governance efforts internationally via the UN. And so we see a bit of tension around this of, is that the right forum? And this is yet another area where the geopolitics of it are complicated.
As you know, skeptics have got two reasons to be doubtful about any US-China AI relationship that might be signed, even if UK and EU and a few other countries join along too. The first worry is, well, people will cheat behind the scenes. We can't trust these other guys. And secondly, even if these countries agree, what about other rogues who may get their hands on powerful AI, whether it's North Korea or Russia or mad James Bond style villains like, better not say his name, but there are people in that category. So what's your answer to such skepticism?
A lot of very smart people are working very hard on this, and it's going to be one of the most difficult challenges of our time. I hope that something someday can be reached, but I think there are a number of barriers. One of them is it's going to be difficult given the geopolitics, but also just different conceptions of what risks will the world face from AI across countries, but also within policy ecosystems, to then arrive at what even the content and the premise of a treaty itself. Unfortunately, that very basic building block is going to be quite messy. Beyond that, there are some other building blocks that I'm hoping to be very optimistic about, because I know that there are a number of very talented people working on verification technologies that would potentially underpin a form of treaty so that each side would know potentially on what scale a political adversary was training large models or what was happening in terms of on-chip activity. A lot of these research efforts are still early stages, but very excited that they're happening, and if there was to be a treaty of some form, that would be quite central to it. On the question, though, of non-state actors or rogue actors coming in that perhaps didn't sign the treaty, or maybe even a country would sign the treaty but not abide by it or not ratify it, that is also a concern. I think we can see this quite clearly already starting to play out in the cyber domain of these offensive capabilities are going to democratize and going to proliferate pretty quickly. And so it will be easier for, well, first we'll see state adjacent actors, but then all the way down to much smaller scale non-state actors having really outsized capabilities to launch, say, offensive cyber attacks, perhaps against critical infrastructures or major companies. That is absolutely a huge concern. There really needs to be a lot of governance innovation in terms of at what levels can this be governed, through what technical means, and also through what social norms. And so I think that a treaty between the US and China and other major players definitely needs to play a role in the future, whether that hopefully includes military applications of AI that are very fast moving at this point, or whether that is extremely large, extremely capable models. Those will be foundational, but that will never be the only answer. That will never be the grand and perfect solution, especially with these tools being accessible to smaller actors. New forms of social governance throughout, say, developer ecosystems, new safety guardrails throughout AI models that are widely available, whether proprietary or open source. We have a long way to go here before those questions are answered. And I think, as we talked about in the panel that we were on a little while ago, there is no silver bullet, but we need to be working on many of these angles.
It's like there's no one thing that makes a technology more functional. It's a whole bunch of clever engineers who build on each other's insights and figure out what works and what doesn't work. It's likely to be the same with safety and with monitoring and with checking. There won't be a single thing that works, but we need to get a whole bunch of people building on each other's insights.
Exactly. And if a miracle happened and an international treaty came about, it needs to be not evaluated as that perfect solution. It needs to be evaluated as one very important strand that we build upon.
You said there was no international treaties available, but aren't some people working on things? For example, Eliezer Yudkowsky and Nate Soares of MIRI, in the appendix material for their book, which is online, they have a draft treaty there, which looks to a naive observer like me like it could be the basis for an international treaty. And I understand there's at least one or two others that are floating around behind the scenes. Have you had a chance to review any of that? Does it look like the kind of thing that might be a step in the right direction?
I have to say I haven't read those specifically, but I am familiar with a number of the others floating around. Given a lot of the points we just covered, there is no one solution, there's no one angle of this that exclusively needs to be governed. And therefore, I think a building block approach is really the most promising one. And that applies throughout what would these treaties cover, but also the level of both technical and legal detail that goes into any form of treaty is immense. And also the enforcement powers and agencies and even just talent that would be required to ensure that a treaty was actually adopted and carried out. There are just so many puzzle pieces, and I think that there are many people, including here at the Oxford Martin School and a few other places, that are thinking about different puzzle pieces within this. I'm glad that there is more and more attention paid, but at the end of the day, we will also need to be very attentive to how the especially US-China relationship plays out. Another thing to be tracking is just windows of opportunity for advancing forms of those puzzle pieces and creating more blocks, even politically as well, to build on towards something like that.
My final question, Kayla, is about the UN. Is the UN going to be a central part of the solution, or is it a bit irrelevant?
The Chinese government certainly hopes that it is a central actor in it. Beyond that, we are seeing so much of the governance efforts playing out at the firm level. I wouldn't say the UN is going to be irrelevant. It's going to have roles to play, especially when thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals, especially when thinking about other agencies, especially as related to climate, especially as related to health. There are going to be just so many aspects that are downstream of advanced AI that need to be managed. The infrastructures throughout the UN are already set up for those purposes. There is always controversy over the effectiveness of that in other realms, climate, global health as really key examples. There will never be a total change away from just the nature of the UN itself is not some all-capable, all-seeing body. It too is subjected to the differing interests of the many nations in the world. And as a result, can perhaps be slow and less effective than some might want, and also less effective than might be needed in the case of highly advanced AI and possible catastrophic events that could flow from that. But again, a patchwork approach, a lot of these institutions already existing. The infrastructure has taken a long time to build and is there, and so it will definitely play a role. And I do hope that all sides geopolitically can mitigate the politicization of the UN system, but also in terms of mitigating the politicization of other international bodies, which I think is present throughout standards organizations and others as well, which will then further impact the effectiveness of their efforts over time.
I look forward to hearing more about your work and how the OCPL is having a positive impact on all the different puzzle pieces that need to be produced and fitted into place.
Yes, absolutely. We've got a lot coming out in the next month.
Thank you very much for joining us, Kayla.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.